Former President Donald Trump is celebrating today following a Supreme Court decision that will in fact allow the former president to appear on state primary ballots. Now, SCOTUS's decision undoes a Colorado ruling that disqualified Trump from the primary ballot by citing January 6th riots as their reasoning behind it. Now, today's ruling comes one day prior to Super Tuesday, when more than a dozen states are set to hold their primary elections. Now, what was the reasoning behind their unanimous decision? The justices said the Constitution does not permit a single state to disqualify a presidential candidate from national office, ruling that such responsibility rests with Congress and not the states. And really the main argument that they're making here is that basically that states can make or cite the 14th Amendment in making decisions about elections pertaining to state and local candidates, but they cannot do so in regard to federal candidates or federal elections. That's really the job of Congress. That's the main argument that they made here, but they made another argument as well. The court warned of disruption and chaos if a candidate for nationwide office could be declared ineligible in some states, but not others, based on the same conduct. Nothing in the Constitution requires that we endure such chaos, arriving at any time or different times up to and perhaps beyond the inauguration, the court said in a 13-page unsigned opinion. Now, how did this case come to be? It's important to know about how it came to be. I think that there's this assumption by Trump supporters that it was the Biden White House or the Biden campaign that was egging this on. Biden has made a public statement about this in the past, saying that they should allow Trump on the primary ballots. But nonetheless, the challenge to Trump's candidacy was brought by 6 Colorado voters, 4 of whom who happen to be Republicans, 2 of whom happen to be independents. The Colorado Supreme Court found that Trump had engaged in insurrection when he summoned his supporters to Washington and encouraged them to disrupt Congress's certification of Biden's victory. That was what occurred on January 6th. But that wasn't an argument that persuaded the Supreme Court justices. At oral argument on February 8th, justices from across the ideological spectrum warned of troubling political ramifications if they permitted Colorado's top court to order the leading Republican presidential candidate off the ballot. Several justices suggested that allowing the state court ruling to bar Trump from federal office would throw the presidential race into turmoil and lead other states to try to disqualify Democratic candidates. Now, I can't wait to share the hysterical reaction by the likes of Keith Olberman. That's gonna be a fun comedic relief moment on the show today. But before we get to that, Cenk, jump in.
We might have millions of people watching this show, but you can be the difference maker, because we just need 1% of our audience to be paid members, and then this show can be around forever. So you can make that difference. Click join now. So understand what the decision is and isn't. So first, they did not adjudicate the insurrection at all. So they say, and not only that, they say the states cannot adjudicate it at all, and apparently the courts can't either. Criminal courts can't either. It has to be an act of Congress, meaning that if Donald Trump was convicted of insurrection after this ruling, I think he could still serve, which goes way too far. And that's why Amy Coney Barrett joined the liberal justices in a dissent on that part. So it's unanimous overall that Trump can stay on the ballot, but as far as how far-reaching this decision is, Barrett joined the others in saying, whoa, no. What do you mean that only Congress can decide this? What if Congress is deadlocked on partisan issues having nothing to do with whether an insurrection happened or not? So, and it also creates the issue of states then not being able to regulate their own elections at the state level, okay, on this issue particularly. Now there's one more twist. I wanna read you this part of the decision and then we'll talk about it. They say states may disqualify persons holding or attempting to hold state office. Now they say that, right? But it's not clear if that applies to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. But definitely not federal office. The states cannot touch federal office. In fact, they say, but states have no power under the Constitution to enforce Section 3 with respect to federal offices, especially the presidency. So it sounds like the states can adjudicate if you went down to January 6th and you were convicted of insurrection and you want to run for mayor, right, or governor, but they cannot adjudicate it if that same person tries to run for Congress or Senate. But on top of that, what it leaves unclear is, can the states take anyone off a ballot for any constitutional reasons if it's the federal office that they're running for, especially the presidency? And so they did not directly address that, but they left that door open. So and there are other parts of the decision that's even broader in terms of saying the states might not have the power to take people off of federal ballots. So
I think that makes sense. So as I was reading about their reasoning and their decision, especially in regard to what states can and can't do, I couldn't help but think about why it's important to protect federal elections from state interference or interference in deciding whether or not the federal candidates should or should not be considered qualified for the ballots. I mean, think about the Civil War and what the Civil War was about, right? So would the federal government want to give the states the kind of power to make that type of decision about federal matters or federal elections?
Yeah, especially in regards to 14th Amendment Section 3. I get the logic of that particular, because think about what Anna's saying. What if South Carolina back then was like, yeah, you say insurrection, I say tomato.
Exactly.
And so these same guys who are part of the Confederacy, I'm gonna send up there now, it's a state matter, right? And these are the justices going saying it's not a state matter. But one of the things they emphasized, Anna, is that if states make different decisions, and then we got a hodgepodge situation, and this is a total mess. And so
I know of a Democratic primary candidate who's dealing with that. So some states decide to keep this individual off the ballot. Others decide to keep the individual on the ballot. So interesting.
Yeah, so let's take a hypothetical for a future run. Let's say that Arnold Schwarzenegger wanted to run next election cycle, right? And he's a naturalized citizen. He could easily take this case, and it's not a slam dunk, but it moves the ball forward for sure. And take this case and go, well, you guys just said that the states can't decide who can run and who can't. That doesn't mean that he wins. The Supreme Court still has to decide whether he can serve, but that would back up the Federal Election Commission that said naturalized citizens can run and basically shouldn't be taken off the ballot. So a lot of the state yahoos that make these decisions, they don't know anything about constitutional law. They're like,
super interesting, and it's true.
Yeah, and they're like, I don't know. I heard in 8th grade that you shouldn't be on the ballot, so I'm gonna take you off. And this is the Supreme Court beginning to say, no, you don't know constitutional law, and that's not your role. Okay, put them on the ballot and leave it up to us.
Now, with that said, let's go to Blue MAGA. The ambassador of Blue MAGA, the top ambassador, is a man by the name of Keith Olberman, who, believe it or not, at one time was a renowned cable news host and now likes to embarrass himself on a regular basis on Twitter. So he posted, following the Supreme Court's unanimous decision, the Supreme Court has betrayed democracy. Its members, including Jackson, meaning Ketanji Brown Jackson, Kagan, and Sotomayor, have proved themselves inept at reading comprehension. And collectively, the court has shown itself to be corrupt and illegitimate. It must be dissolved. So there you have Keith Olberman arguing that a major part of our system of checks and balances should absolutely be dissolved because they had a unanimous decision that he didn't like. Insanity.
Yeah, so I think he's lost his mind.
Totally.
So a couple of things here. Number one, can't they read? Well, wait a minute now. Constitutional law is very complicated. And I could personally attest to the word equal being very much in dispute. Even though it seems like a crystal clear word, it is one that has taken thousands and thousands of pages of Supreme Court decisions to adjudicate what the word equal means. So for Olberman to do sophistry and be like, oh, they can't read, they should be dissolved, that's childish. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, his main case is you gotta vote against Trump because the democracy's on the line. And now he's saying, let's dissolve one of the branches of our government. It's a totally indefensible, just moronic. And when you're attacking the liberal justices, look, if there was a money in politics case or other cases where they said something egregious, okay, and I have that conversation. But in this case, they were unanimous for a reason, because no one adjudicated Trump to be an insurrectionist, other than random Democrats in 2 or 3 states. That's not how the process works. That's not how the process should work. But guys like Olberman, who are blue MAGA, have lost their minds. That's why you call them blue MAGA, right? Red MAGA thinks Trump won the 2020 election, et cetera. So they lost their minds in that way. It detached from objective reality. And blue MAGA is just as detached. The other thing that Olberman is always crying about is, don't believe numbers. Numbers are lies. Only believe my emotions, right? And that is not a rational way to think. And he's become a buffoon, really.
Right, and the numbers
saying that, oh yeah, no polling matters. There's no such thing as science when it comes to polling. The data sucks. Numbers are for losers. Emotions, right?
Totally. I mean, look, I totally understand that commentary when you're dealing with one standout poll, but the results that are pretty damning for Biden in the general have been replicated in poll after poll after poll. At some point, you have to maybe accept reality. And that's part of the problem, Cenk. We have a growing group of people on both sides who just do not want to accept reality. And that makes everything so much more difficult. And what drives me insane is that the media has become super partisan. So you either watch left-wing media or right-wing media, and audiences have become so accustomed to hearing one ideological side that once they get any information that dispels preconceived notions, they don't react well to it. And I think that's part of the problem. And so we obviously have our own political views and our own political, preferences, but the facts are the facts, and we're not gonna hide that from you, even if it's uncomfortable to know what's really going on in the country.
Yeah, it's not that hard. I mean, Olberman was nominally in news before. I mean, so I guess at MSNBC he was mainly doing propaganda for Democrats, and now he's just mask off on it. But so I hate Donald Trump. I probably dislike Donald Trump more than Keith Olberman does. That doesn't mean I'm gonna lie to you and tell you that he's losing when he isn't. Every poll shows him up by 4 or 5, and the Democratic candidate has to win by 4 or 5 in order to win the Electoral College. And I'm super curious what these blue MAGA delusional types are going to do when Biden loses. And at this point, if the election were held today, he'd get landslided. He would lose every swing state. So, right now, if you tell the Olbermans of the world, they'll say, no, Nate Silver's lying, Cenk Uygur is lying. And Keith Olbermann literally did that on a podcast last week. Ezra Klein is lying, Bill Maher is lying, and he put me in that group, right?
Hilarious.
They're all lying, all the numbers are lying, right? You look so deranged and desperate. So what happens when that desperation and emotional, instability runs into the fact that Biden lost, right, in 2024? If that's what happens, I mean, 2-2-2. I don't want Trump to win, but if that happens, are they going to go full MAGA? Are they going to be like, no, they stole the election. No, we don't accept it. Stop the steal. Continue the steal. No, we don't accept it. There's mules. There's 2,000 mules.
I don't know.
Is starting to sound like 2,000 mule territory.
It is interesting that once you expand your mind and accept that there are people on the Democratic side who behave similarly to the hardcore MAGA types who also refuse to accept reality, you kind of see the world for what it really is, right? There is no good side, bad side, people who accept reality and people who don't, meaning Democrats do and Republicans don't. You have a faction in both parties who have just completely lost their minds, and it is concerning.
And look, blue MAGA has a longer history than red MAGA, if we're being honest, and it's not as deep, right? Red MAGA wound up in La La Land, right? Just totally detached from facts. A bunch of them thinking Trump was still president or was going to be reinstated. These things are just off this planet, right? But blue MAGA has been insisting that Democrats who take millions of dollars in corporate donations don't get affected by that money at all. That they're angels and that their ideology and how much they care to do the right thing overwhelms the fact that they're getting millions of dollars in political contributions, and their voting record is identical to what their donors want. But they're like, no, that is a wild, wild coincidence. We never really explore that enough in mainstream media for sure. They never ever talk about that, right? But that is a lunatic position. And it's held by a lot of Democrats.
Well,
the one thing I'll give the Republicans credit for is that they have let go of that lunatic position. Now, if you ask most Republicans, do your Republican politicians who take millions of dollars, are they honest people who are just doing it based on ideology? I think most Republican voters say no. They're crooks and they're taking the donation money, and some of them are on our side, but a lot of them are uniparty, not on our side. And that is actually closer to reality. So it's a mixed bag, as you see there.